So just first of all, as ever, just a bit about the project for those of you that aren't yet signed up as volunteers. Then you can go to our website, which is just in the middle here. Our project is called Wilder Future for Warwickshire, funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and involves lots of events like this where you learn about ecology, and then in the future we're going to be doing a lot more of media and comms to help raise awareness about ecological issues that we feel passionate about. So do check out how to sign up. It's all free because it's funded. If you do want to tweet about anything or put anything up on Instagram, we are on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and you can use the hashtags down the bottom left hand side here. And just about amphibians in Warwickshire, so I've just put a list here that I'll send out in an email to the volunteers that signed up, just to say where you can see good, at least, habitats for amphibians in Warwickshire. So these are some of our Warwickshire Wildlife Trust reserves on the left-hand side here. This picture is actually taken from Ashlawn Cutting, which is a pretty cool picture. I like it a lot. So you can see hopefully amphibians, and if not actually the amphibians, you can see some examples of habitat in those places. In general at the Trust, obviously we try and manage our reserves for wildlife, so that's a bit of a balancing act depending on the different species, but we try and keep our water bodies as open as possible. So that involves us sort of maintaining them in the winter season and a bit in the autumn. And this is when amphibians become more terrestrial, so they're less likely to be using the water bodies, so it shouldn't harm them as much. We also try and keep vegetation and cover near our water bodies because we know that our amphibians will use those as hibernacular in the winter months. So maintenance really is very varied across the year, and depending on the task that needs doing, the machinery that needs doing, the weather, and other wildlife that you need to take into account. For instance, you don't necessarily want to be cutting an area of scrub in bird breeding season, so that will depend on that. Some of the issues that we do have with amphibians is making sure that we retain water on our sites. So some of them, Whittaker Heath, for example, we have difficulties with maintaining the water levels because they can sort of leak out, as it were. And a lot of this might be to do with the substrate that's underneath and the original use of the land. So we have to come in and try and manage that and try and maintain those water bodies so they retain water. But I'm sure Emily will talk to you a lot more about the amphibian life cycle and the needs of the habitat at different periods of time. So I'll just stop sharing that now. And I will pass over to Emily.
Right, perfect. I will share my screen and we'll get going. Here we go. I'll give it a bit of time just to pop up. The Frog Life logo will stay in the same place the whole presentation, so if you do just want to minimise faces, you can pop it up there and it won't get in the way of anything. Yeah, so firstly, thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for spending your evening to learn all about our amphibians, a bit more about the identification of the key and common species you may find when you're out and about on any sites. We'll also touch upon a couple of non-natives that unfortunately I do find sometimes when I'm out and about surveying ponds. We'll then go into a few other elements. So we'll go into a little bit about surveying for those amphibians, and this is the perfect time of year to have a talk like this. You're right at the beginning of breeding season, so no doubt if you're going to spot them, you're going to spot them soon. And then we'll end off just talking a little bit about disease. There's one slide right near the end. I have a little note at the bottom. It's got some quite sort of disturbing images, shall we say, on them. So if any of you are taking this opportunity to have a snack or eating a bit of dinner during this, it might not be the best slide for you. So we'll kick off first with who are Frog Life. So we're a wildlife conservation charity, and we conserve our amphibians and reptiles and the habitats that they depend on. So the Trust is the charity element of Frog Life. It's who I work for. So we do three sort of main areas. So transforming landscapes, that's lots about building ponds and building other terrestrial habitats, restoring ponds, and lots of sort of that large and quite often landscape scale kind of improvement works for our species. Transforming lives is very much kind of like this, like talks and lots of public engagement that we go out and do. It's a wide range of kind of work that we do. We do everything from working with the Ministry of Justice and putting ponds in all the prisons across the UK and teaching some of the prisoners how to manage those kind of habitats and get very hands-on, all the way through to going into schools. And probably one of the most crazy of things that we do, well, my team does, we pretend to be grass snakes and we convert swimming pools into pond habitats and teach kids about life cycles whilst swimming around in the water. Probably the one activity we do where I lose my voice in that kind of environment. The third area of our work is transforming research. So lots of that is working with international partners in looking into amphibian disease, and any sort of issues regarding population declines across basically globally, across amphibians and reptiles all around the world. So there's a few you may have heard of, things like chytrid fungus or ranavirus. We'll touch upon them a bit later on, but that's some of the areas of our research. And sort of a big area at the moment is looking into wildlife mortality on roads. So that's quite a big area that we look into. So we've got toad crossing season just coming up, where you get lots of common toads moving across the roads, and there's quite a high death rate to this. And in partnership with that, we work on developing sort of, I suppose, mitigation. We create wildlife tunnels underneath roads to connect those habitats. Sort of as our urban population and our human world changes, and we keep expanding and encroaching into the natural world, it's the best ways that we can kind of help our amphibians and reptiles be able to navigate that. The other element of our kind of work is Frog Life Ecological Services, and they essentially are who anyone can get in touch with us if they'd like to, and pay for us to come in and do any sort of private ponds or private training, whether that's getting your Great Crested Newt license all the way through to actual sort of training you how to manage habitats. But that's us in a nutshell, shall we say. There's plenty more you can find out on our website. But we'll kick off with all the fun stuff and what you want to see, lots of photos of our animals. So we'll begin with our amphibian identification. So we have 7 key native British amphibians. So at the top, we have our anurans. So our anurans are our frogs and toads. So we've got the common frog, combining them there. Common frog on the top left, common toad in the middle, and the Natterjack toad on the right-hand side. Versus our salamanders or newt species. So we have our smooth newt on the left, our Powermate newt in the middle, and our great crested newt on the right. Just to clarify that, I generally will only use the term newt, but all newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts. So if you go and do any form of ecology outside of the UK, you may come across some salamander species. So all across Europe, you'll have things like fire salamanders. There's a slight differentiation between them, just mainly being newts spend slightly more time of the year within that water, within the water itself, within ponds. But they're the main ones that you will spot when out and about. I did say 7, and this last frog, the bullfrog, gets its own fancy transition into the slide for a very good reason. So the bullfrog is native to the UK, but it did go extinct in the Victorian era, and it is something that's been successfully reintroduced. It was reintroduced sort of in the about sort of the 1970s, and it's doing quite well. The main places you will spot the bullfrog right now is across sort of the Norfolk area, so Norfolk down into a bit of Suffolk. That's where they've been reintroduced, and that's where lots of those sort of breeding programs are going on. But they're a fantastic little frog to be able to spot if you've got a list and you're, well, when we're allowed to get travelling again, you want to go out and be able to see later on in the year. So we'll begin, of course, with the namesake of our whole organisation, the common frog. So the common frogs, most likely the amphibian people spot the most. So this is whether it's in gardens or if you're out on allotments or in any form of green spaces. These are the ones that always seem to be knocking about, consuming everything they can find. And the key ID features we look for when we identify it as a frog rather than a toad is not only are we looking for this body shape, so these sort of the 4 limbs where they sit up quite tall. So that tells us first off it's an anuran, so a frog or a toad, and the way that they're sitting and their sort of stature. We're looking for that smooth skin. So you should hopefully be able to see my cursor here. But you can see on both of the frogs, it's got quite a sort of smooth, almost waxy looking skin across all of their body, and that's a key ID feature you'll be looking for, only sort of found on the frogs. The key thing that shows us it's a common frog is actually this dark eye mask. So you can see just behind their eye here, it's almost like I know the kids we teach in schools, they call it a superhero mask. if you've got that dark patterning just behind their eye, where you can kind of spot the eardrum here, if that's completely covered by a sort of darker coloration, then you know it's a common frog you're specifically looking at. That's really useful for us actually, because at this time of year when they're all in the ponds, and you might only actually be seeing the eyes and the top of the head of the frog. So you can already see if it's got that dark eye mask, then you know it's a common frog that you've spotted. The sort of third and main other identification feature that you're looking for is those back legs. So common frog's back legs, you can see here, they're very long, so they're folded over twice at the back of their body. And those, if you were to stretch the common frog's legs all the way out, their leg length would actually be either equal or longer than their nose just to the base of their back. So they're incredibly powerful, muscly legs, which are pretty much used to propel themselves off either into the water or away from any forms of predators. So tends to be whenever people ask us or get in touch with us to ask about what they've spotted in their garden, if you've disturbed anything in your garden and it's moved away very quickly, so it's hopped or leapt away, then you know it's a common frog that you've spotted, because they're the ones with the big powerful back legs. That striped patterning is also quite important for us. So if you're lucky enough to have one sitting quite still for you, like these two here in these photos, if you see these stripes here, then you know it's a frog that you're looking at. So toads, you will not find this stripy marking on their legs at all. So you'll know if it's got stripes there, it's definitely a frog that you're spotting. That's one of the key things that we look for with them. Now, there's a few other things that do differ a little bit as you look across frogs. So one of the other things, on the next slide I'll show you, there's quite a wide variation of coloration you can get in common frogs. These two are quite standard looking frogs. We've got a lovely brown one in the bottom left and a lovely bright green traditional looking frog on the top right there. But you do get them all the way through the reds and all that kind of coloration. One thing to look out for actually at this time of year, which particularly if you live near a pond, the male frogs at this time of year will be the ones mainly calling within the water. So a good way to see who's calling in the water, if you look at sort of the ripples of the water going away from them, you'll find they have a single vocal sac just underneath their chin, and that will be inflating, and basically the whole water will vibrate away from them. A really good thing to do, which I quite enjoy doing, particularly if you have a nice sort of a lens, or even if you've got a camera to be able to zoom in quite close. Their throats tend to go quite a bright white. And sometimes even sort of a bluey colour on their throats, the males, and essentially the brighter white or the bluer looking their throat is and their calling is actually indicating you it's the top frog of the pond. They've got the most sort of energy and they're sort of in the best body condition possible as they're calling through the water itself. So that's something quite useful for you to have a little look at. I do have a sound here I'm going to play for you, so I'm going to play their calls throughout the key species, because I always think people tend to think of calls mainly with things like birds, but you don't necessarily think about the noises that all of our amphibians make and how they all differ. So it might be possible if next door has a pond and you're constantly hearing something very strange all through spring, it's possible it's an amphibian that you're hearing. So I'll play this for you. So the common frog here, you can hear it almost like a cat's purr, essentially. It's a very sort of low and continuous sort of croaking sound that you'll hear within that water. It's almost like that purr going across. And this can be quite deafening if you're in a very active pond. So the one that Debbie showed us earlier, no doubt in the evenings would have been quite loud to be near. All the males all calling out, trying to prove they're the best male to mate with within that pond itself. So just looking here at the colorations, all of these frogs here are completely fine and healthy. It's just showing here the different range that you can find. There's no real reason for this other than just as they pass on through their genes, it might have a certain preference for a certain colour in that sense. What we do tend to find actually when you get closer to more urban areas and particularly like red brick buildings, of course it makes sense that the sort of more redder coloured or orange coloured frogs tend to do a bit better just because they're easier at mixing in with any rubble or bricks or anything like that may be in their surrounding. So there's quite a big variation within these. Another quite important thing actually I want to show on this photo here is although they've all got quite a traditional sitting pose here, you'll be able to spot here, so you can see the back legs are quite hunched on this frog on the side. Generally, if you're seeing frogs with very sort of large protruding hips at the back, it tends to tell you it's a little bit of a younger frog. So they start off a little skinnier as they begin their life, and eventually they'll start to sort of fill out, shall we say, as they start to get a little bit older and closer to breeding more often, as opposed to down in the bottom right, which if you're seeing a frog that's almost entirely round, particularly around this time of year, it tends to be the females that you're spotting. So the females in all of our species tend to be a little bit larger than the males, and of course in this kind of condition where she's full of spawn, she very much is larger, which although we wouldn't encourage you handling them at this kind of time or when they're looking like this, let's say she's in an inappropriate place like on a road or somewhere where she's in immediate danger, if you were to lift her up, you'd actually feel all of that sort of spawn within her as the way that her body would move. It's quite a strange feeling, but something just to be aware of. They can certainly look a little bit different as you see them throughout the seasons. Now, I should put a caveat in here. My main job title is the London Toad Project Manager. I do have a focus on toads. I'm a bit biased towards toads, so you may find me talking quite a lot about how handsome these lovely chaps are here. And whilst you're all muted, it's amazing because no one can disagree. But this is the ever wonderful common toad. So the common toad, just like what you're spotting here, we identify them. Again, they've got that kind of shape that you saw there with the frog. It's that kind of very sitting upright kind of body shape, but they've got this lovely sort of rough or warty skin. And when you look at this, you can see it doesn't really look waxy. It looks quite dry, and that's something quite important for them. So it is an old wives' tale. If you was to pick up a toad, you'd get warts yourself. That's not at all why they've got warts. They're not in any way contagious to us, but there's a very key reason for these warts. So I'm just going to show you on this toad over here. You'll see there are two very large warts or bumps just behind its eyes. These are actually called paratoid glands. And these glands here, they secrete a toxin. And this toxin is called bufotoxin, which ties in with its name, so bufo. And essentially, that toxin, whenever they get scared, instead of like a frog which quickly moves away and tries to run or leap to get out of the way, they stay very still. They tend to flatten out, make their surface area as large as possible, and they secrete this toxin all over their back. So that's why the warty skin comes in handy for them, because by having all of that texture on their back, it holds that liquid on there for longer. So it's basically keeping that bad taste on their back. That toxin for the common toad would taste very similar to acetone or nail polish remover. Don't ask me who had figured that out. I definitely don't encourage any of you to go out there and test that for yourself, but be assured it's enough of a bad taste to stop any of the main predators from eating them. So that would include even things like domestic cats, which we all know are wild tigers that go out, that live with us. They tend also not to bother too much with toads. If you've got domestic cats near toad populations, it might be one toad gets picked up by a cat. The minute it tastes it, they spit them straight back out. That's the same all the way through dogs. I know sometimes common toads can get a bit of bad press in springtime, as unfortunately the RSPCA, not all areas are always well informed, but if a dog was to consume loads and loads of common toads, quite often it will throw up, and you will sometimes find they'll drool, but that's purely because if you'd eaten lots of things that don't taste particularly well and unsettle your tummy, of course you throw up, but it will do no harm to that dog at all. But that is why they've got that rough warty skin. The other thing to cast your eyes to, so on this photo on the right, you can see they've got very little legs. So they've got very sort of short and stumpy hind legs. Toads are very chilled in their lifestyle. They walk pretty much everywhere. They're not hopping anywhere. They're not moving anywhere fast. They're just moving very slowly across the landscapes as they're heading back to their ponds at this time of year, and then later on in the year as they're dispersing out to their terrestrial habitats. This is really important. This is a really important difference between them, because this is one of the reasons why the common toad has been through quite a steeper population decline in the UK. One of the big problems that's occurred with this is, although they're perfectly set up in having their protection from predators by tasting bad, it's not at all helped them as we've changed the landscape and we've built roads or other sort of hard to reach places. So the problem that occurs here, and there is a large frog life project called Toads on Roads, is as toads migrate across the roads in springtime, actually right now, they've already started to move in Cornwall. The south moves first, and eventually over the next few weeks, you'll find all the toads are moving in the UK. As they start to cross these roads, when they get scared of any vehicle coming towards them, the predatory response from that is to stay still, flatten out, taste bad, which of course doesn't help when there's any vehicles coming towards them. To give you a really horrible statistic on that, it's about 20 tonnes of dead common toads each year pulled off of British roads. And that's just the sheer amount that's squashed onto those roads as they're trying to migrate across. This migration is no small feat at all. It's a fantastic thing to spot, and I do urge, if any of you have got any local Toads on Roads patrols, do go out, even if it's only for a couple of nights, to spot this happen. Some patrols can have up to 2,000 males moving an evening, which is not something people think about in the UK, a mass migration of that. All these very focused male toads heading straight back to that pond. They're fantastic animals where they always breed in the exact same ponds. They walk in the exact same route every year. So we can identify what specific roads they're going to cross and whereabouts on those roads they're going to cross. And they're very good at just, walking on through and charging to get to that pond. It's a fantastic sight to be able to spot. The other thing, when it comes back to the ID of them, is they've got no dark patch behind their eye. So this again is useful for if you've missed the migration, all the amphibians are already in the pond and you can only see the top of their heads. If you're just seeing sort of a large golden looking eye, just like what you can spot here, then you know that it's a common toad you're looking at and not a common frog. So if it doesn't have that mask, you know that it's most likely a toad that you're spotting in any of your ponds nearby. The other thing is that golden eye. I say we, it's only really me I think that calls them this. I tend to call them the James Bond of the pond because toads will always have a golden eye. So that's another really useful thing for you to be able to identify in the field, particularly if you're looking at a pond that's got quite high reeds or anything like that around the edge and you can only pretty much just see a shimmer across the eyes. If it's gold, then you're in luck with these lovely guys here. So I will play their sound because believe it or not, common toads, their call sounds nothing like the common frog call. So yeah, quite a high-pitched quark, as we call it. It's a very, very high-pitched, repetitive call to in the water, which again you'll start to hear very soon if any ponds near you have common toads within them. This next slide is just having a little look at that decline I was talking about with mortality on roads. It's quite a hefty decline. So that mortality on roads and loss of habitats and a few other factors have led to this. So a species which unfortunately, as known as a common species, being called the common toad, isn't particularly that common anymore. And it is something that's had dramatic declines in their actual populations. So where maybe there used to be a population of 10,000 toads in one area, it's declined quite heavily to a much smaller amount of those toads. So just something to be aware of if you are out and spotting them. And also, I'll get there in the end, but another good reason to always record what you spot when out and about so that we're aware where they are. And also when it comes down to things like funding, we can really sort of hone in or target areas that need the help the best. So we'll go on to one of the lesser spotted species in the UK. So this is the one that was reintroduced into Norfolk, the pool frog. So the pool frog, just for a bit of context versus the common frog, they're a little bit smaller. So whereas common frogs generally, if you look at sort of the size of your fist, that generally is quite a good indication of the size of a common frog when it's sitting there. Pool frogs are a little bit smaller than that. So they're about 2/3 of the size of a common frog. And yeah, there's a few key ID things that we look for when we look to spot them. So the first thing is this sort of a dorsolateral stripe. So running right down their back here, you'll see there's one sort of it's normally sort of a bright green, but it can range through to the yellows, a stripe that runs all the way down from basically their nose all the way down to their hips. If you're spotting that stripe there, then you know you've spotted something pretty cool within your pond. They also have very prominent ridges. So you'll spot these two ridges here They almost look like you've slightly folded the frog in the edges. If you're spotting that very harsh shape on their body, then again, it's another indication it's a cool frog that you've been able to spot. This photo I think is fantastic for showing, particularly for this time of year, that if there are frogs out and about in the ponds near you, if they've got a dual vocal sac like this, so when they're calling, instead of just inflating here like the common frog, they're inflating at the sides, then you know it's a pool frog or potentially one of the non-natives I'm going to speak about a bit later on. So if you're seeing that at the sides, then you definitely know it's not a common frog that you're spotting. But yeah, another great species to be able to see when out and about. Another quite rare species to be able to spot, the Natterjack toad. There are a few populations of these across the UK in very, very small areas. They're mainly found in sort of sandier areas, so along sand dunes. And particularly if you ever travel down to Cornwall or Dorset or anywhere like that, you may find going along the coast, you'll find it'll be a bit strange. You'll be following a coastal path, and then you'll find a pond completely fenced in. And they tend to be the breeding ponds of Natterjack toads, as again, another species that's struggling a little bit with our sort of changing landscape. Those sort of heavily guarded ponds tend to be the homes of Natterjack toads. So again, just like our common toad, they have that rough, warty skin. They have that handy feature, very similar to the bullfrog, that dorsal stripe that runs all the way down their back. So again, if that's quite a bright yellow, it tends to be. If you'll be able to spot that, then you know it's something quite special you're looking for. And it tends to be quite mottled. So although this one's not that useful because he's camouflaging very well, he's doing his job, camouflaging very well to the sand, you do tend to see their patterning's not very similar to the common toad, which tends to be sort of one flat colour across their body, whether that's sort of browns through to the darker reds colours. Whereas Natterjack toad is far more mottled in its appearance. So just going back a bit in their life cycle, and also pretty much heading into what we're going to be seeing in about a month's time. The exciting time of year for our amphibians is their spawn and tadpoles. So even at those stages, we can tell the difference between frogs and toads. So frog spawn, which is the photo in the top left there, they're laid in these huge sort of, we call them mats, across the top of the water. So a female frog in springtime quite happily will lay from about 2,000 to 3,000 eggs in sort of across the season. And when she lays them, she'll lay them at the top of the pond, generally around the edge, although you can get very active ponds. But if there's been a lot of frogs in there, you'll find it's just layer upon layer of these sort of tapioca jelly-like balls left on top of the surface. One of the things that we actually do when we're surveying for sort of populations to get an idea of how many individuals are in the pond is you do things called spawn mats. So you basically take a section of spawn and you're measuring it out to get an idea of, if you take the amount of eggs roughly, let's say in 1 meter squared, and then you figure out how many meters across your pond have frog spawn, then you can figure out how many are roughly there. In general, one clump of frog spawn has been laid by one female frog. So in that clump, there's normally about 500 or 600 eggs in that clump. So that's giving you a good indication of how many females have been in that area laying. You can tell this very easily against toad spawn. So this is common toad spawn at the top right. So toad spawn is laid in strings, and they're a little bit more guarded the way that they lay this. So the female toad will sink to the bottom of the pond and she'll walk around any vegetation around the edges. So anything she can get around, and she'll lay those strings completely intertwined amongst all of that vegetation to keep it hidden away from any predators. She's laying significantly less than the common frog. She'll only be laying about 200 to 300 eggs in the season. And there's good reason for that, because when she's laying those, all of those individual eggs, so each black dot, already has that bufotoxin in them. So at that point in their life, before they've even got out and started swimming, they already taste pretty bad to most predators within the pond. So they're a lot better sort of protected than many of the other animals within the pond itself, including the frog spawn, which is great for basically everything else in the pond, which can feast on it later on in the season. The Natterjack toad, just to make it a little easier for you to spot, if you're ever lucky enough to go to a pond with those in, Natterjack toads lay single strings of spawn. So it's just one string at a time, so not double like that. Then you know that it's a Natterjack toad that you're spotting. One tip with that, if you're netting, you've happened to net it out and you're looking at it on your hand, be aware, of course, as you sort of flex the string itself, you may find that double string may look like it's a single string, but just let it rest in your hands. And if it goes back to 2 by 2, then you know it's common toads that you're looking at. We'll go one more stage forward. So we're looking here at their sort of tadpole stage. Again, quite different, and they've got quite different behaviours within the pond. So common frog tadpoles are brown in coloration and have that lovely gold speckling all over them. They spend quite a lot of time in the shallows, common frog tadpoles. So you'll find them in small groups, generally in small groups, and they'll just be there trying to get that sort of warmth from the sun to help with their development. They'll also be about and eating within the pond itself, but you tend to spot them just around the edges. Whereas the wonderful common toad, their tadpoles are also equally great. They don't do things by halves at all. Loads of them will be all together in a big group, so you can get a few hundred of them all gathered together, and they move around the pond in massive shoals. So almost like if you've ever seen starlings or any other birds doing murmurations in the sky, toad tadpoles do this. So you can sit on a pond different platform and just watch them, and they'll move around the entire pond in huge shoals. And it's a fantastic sight to see. Again, they're pretty lucky that they can spend a lot of time near the surface, knowing most things won't eat them at all within that pond. To give you an idea on percentages, because I always think it's lovely to talk about a common frog laying potentially 3,000 eggs, but how many of those actually make it to an adult frog who then goes on to breed? It's a tiny amount. So it's about 0.15% that make it as common frogs all the way to adulthood. Whereas toads, they do slightly better on these odds. It's about 3% that will make it all the way up. So yeah, they're very important in the food chain overall, but yeah, not many of them make it the whole way. So I said I'll touch a little bit along non-natives. I always think this is a little bit of a depressing slide, really, because the list is pretty long. It pretty much equals the amount of natives we do have. There's a lot of non-natives that you can potentially spot in the UK. Not all in the same sort of numbers, and not all with the same detrimental effects to our native species or to their habitats. The biggest worry out of that entire list, if you're spotting them, is the North American bullfrog. It's a massive frog. And yeah, if you ever spot one of those out on site, or you think just this giant frog that's pretty much bigger than the size of my head, if you're spotting that in a pond, please do report it, as hopefully your local authority will act fast and remove them, because they're terrible for our landscapes and pretty much eat everything they can fit in their mouths. There's a few others there, and I'm going to touch upon a couple of them on the next slide, the ones that you're more likely to see in the sort of wild world, shall we say. So top left is the midwife toad. We do get midwife toads about. So although they're sometimes people would call them quite a cute little toad, they're quite small in size. They're about half the size of your fist when they're all together. They're also quite commonly seen. They're the toads that carry all of their spawn on their back legs. So you may find them with huge spawn clumps on the back of their legs. So you can spot them out and about. I know from my little patch down in the southeast of the UK, we've got one site in London that does have midwife toads. And actually at this time of year, as with most of our non-natives, they won't be in the ponds yet. So most non-natives won't be entering the ponds until about May time, so they all come slightly later. So it tends to be when people are contacting us through June and July going, there are still frogs or toads making calls in the back garden. It tends not to be a native species that's making a racket at that time of year. They've got the craziest sound. So if you've heard this sound and maybe thought you've got an annoying neighbour who has an alarm that constantly goes off, here's the very weird electronic beeping of the midwife toad. So yeah, not really a sound people would imagine a toad would make, but yeah, you can sometimes hear this out and about. It's not just someone potentially having an alarm or playing something from Doctor Who, but it is potentially a midwife toad nearby. We'll go to the top right now and talk a little bit about this guy. This guy is the marsh frog. The marsh frog's the non-native I come across most of the time when I'm out on sites. So the marsh frog is native to mainland Europe. and you'll find them across ponds all over there, but they've never been native here. So since the last ice age, which is when we define our native species, at that point when that occurred on sort of the Great British Isles, there was never any marsh frogs. So marsh frogs cause a couple of problems for us. So one of the key problems is marsh frogs very happily sit about the same size as my head. As with all frog and toad species, they eat whatever they can fit in their mouths, which, whether that be smaller marsh frogs, any other species we've already spoken about, small ducklings, they'll take anything they can fit, and that's what they swallow. So they're a bit of a problem in that sense. The other problem, and we've got the Victorians to blame for this, it ties in very closely with the pool frog world, is when you cross or mate a marsh frog with a pool frog, you get the edible frog. So the edible frog is a sterile hybrid, so that cannot go on to make more edible frogs. But in the early Victorian era, they thought, well, in the UK we might start eating edible frogs. So they actually collected quite a lot of marsh frogs from mainland Europe, shipped them all over here. And down in the Sussex coast, so across places like up Rye Harbour, they used to have large frog farms where they would collect pool frogs from the wild and mate them with marsh frogs to create these edible frogs. But then there was a bit of a problem. No one wants to eat frogs, so they didn't know what to do. And back then, and unfortunately it still sometimes happens now, the response to that is, well, let's just release them into the wild. So that is why in the southeast particularly, although anywhere near cities, you tend to come across marsh frog populations. This isn't the same story for why they're everywhere. It's not just there was loads of frog farms all over the UK. They were also collected as a very traditional looking frog. They're lovely and green. They have very yellowy eyes. Yeah, they're quite large. People like them. And again, that sort of collecting anything that looks vaguely ornamental and great. Quite a lot of people brought them to introduce into their back gardens. I know there's one poor lady in Essex that was blamed for all of Essex's marsh frogs. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't have been alone in doing this, but she'd released marsh frogs into the garden, and now they've spread like hotcakes across everything. The other two at the bottom, less often spotted. So the fire-bellied toad, you do spot it every so often. It's a fantastic looking toad. So if you looked on its underside, it's got a lovely bright orange belly, and it's got lots of sort of markings all over that. That's something, if you go and travel around anywhere like Germany, you'll find loads of fire-bellied toads across sort of the forests and places like that. You find them every so often. They creep up around the outskirts of cities again. I don't know again whether if that's people that have just collected them from elsewhere and released them here, but they are one of the species that tends to appear. And then in the bottom right, the African clawed toad, even its name suggests it's very far away from home. That has a very sad story to why you may find them in the UK. There is, as far as we're aware, only one population of African clawed toads left in the UK, and that's in sort of mid to South Wales. They were actually brought here in the sort of mid-1900s and brought into labs all across the UK, as if you expose a female African clawed toad to a pregnant woman's urine, it will produce spawn. So it was very early pregnancy testing. So they collected loads of these African clawed toads from South Africa, brought them over to the labs and started to use them as pregnancy tests. When we got a bit later on through the 1900s, and we developed sort of modern day pregnancy testing, we didn't need the frogs anymore, and the result there was they just released them. And lots of these labs were based in Wales, which is why there was still a population there. This story gets a little bit worse. It wasn't until 1993 that they realised that chytrid, which is the amphibian killer, the disease that has affected, I think it's about 75% of all amphibians across the world. That disease was brought to the UK by the African clawed toads. None of them were checked when they were brought here, and none of them were checked or swabbed before releasing. Yeah, it wasn't until 1993 they'd realised that's why they were having spikes of chytrid in parts of Wales. And so since then, the eradication programme of getting rid of those African clawed toads has been going on. It just, unfortunately, they figured that out a bit late in the year after mating. So there was many very indistinguishable little toad tadpoles that they weren't sure what to do with. There's a lot of literature about this. If you're interested to go down the looking into frogs or toads in the world of pregnancy. Oh, I haven't let you listen to the marsh frog, the very sinister marsh frog. Here you go. So marsh frog sounds very much like a sort of duck quacking, or sometimes we say sort of a sinister and rapid laugh. Kind of useful as well to identify them by. If come sort of late spring, early summer, you look into a pond, but you can see no waterfowl or anything in there that could be making that noise, but you're hearing sort of almost a quacking kind of sound or that kind of thing, then it may be very possible it's marsh frogs you've found. So we'll go on to the newts. After this sort of newt section, we'll have our short break. So by all means, at that point, you can all have a drink or anything like that. But we'll kick off with our lovely newt species. So we have 3 native newts. We have the smooth newt, also known as the common newt. It's fine to call it the common newt. Most people know what you mean. The only reason why we tend to call it its true name, the smooth newt, is just because as you move way more north, so all the way up into Scotland, it's no longer the most common newt. So just to be aware of, if you move to Glasgow or Edinburgh and you start speaking about the lovely common newt, they'll all be thinking you're speaking about the Powermate newt. So smooth newt tends to be the name we do stick with them. We've got the Powermate newt and the great crested newt. We will talk a little bit about 2 of the non-natives that you might encounter, but we'll touch upon them a little bit later on. So first off, the smooth newt. So the smooth newt, most likely for the county you're all joining us from, this is most likely the newt that you're spotting within any sort of ponds, within gardens or anything like that. So the lovely smooth newt has a very yellowy or orange coloured belly. They've got lots of sort of black spots on that. So actually on this male here in the bottom left, you can kind of see it there. You can see his lovely spots. His spots are quite important for us to have a little look at. Because the smooth newt spots are almost perfectly circular. So if you're seeing lovely circular spots all across his body and across his belly, then you know it's a smooth newt, definitely, that you're spotting. The other thing, it's a little bit more intrusive, but let's say you've been pond dipping or you're doing a newt survey, you've collected them out of the pond and you have that chance to have a little look at them. If you was to flip them over, not only would you see a spotty belly, you'll also find their throats or their sort of chin, this kind of area, will be sort of a cream or off-white colour. And they generally do have spots that run all the way up to the top. If you're seeing that coloration, it's a really important feature to be able to spot. Then you know it's a smooth newt again that you'll be able to spot. So the newts, the male newts particularly, go through quite a transformation. In a few weeks' time, really, they'll begin doing this, although there has been a few keen newts already in ponds. The males get into their full breeding attire, all the bells and whistles for this. So they gain these gorgeous sort of long crests. So it's a very sort of smooth, wavy crest. And this crest, it begins here, just at the back of their head, all the way down to their tail, and there are no breaks in that at all. So that's going to be a key thing to remember. So there's absolutely no breaks in his wavy tail. So not only does he gain that, he gets brighter in his coloration. So he gets even more elaborate with all of his spots and his colours. His feet as well, although this isn't a very good photo to show it, they're very fringed. So the best way I can liken this to is if you've ever sort of got quite a cheap toy, let's say you've been to the Poundland, you bought a cheap plastic toy and you found that as they've sealed the edges, there's a bit of that plastic that just sticks around the edge of the seal. That's essentially what their toes start to look like. So they get this very, very fine sort of fringe around all of their toes. So that's something again that will show you that it is a smooth newt that you're spotting. It's very important for them to look like this because newt courtship is quite an elaborate thing they go through. Not only do they dress up to the nines like this, get this lovely crest, get this lovely belly, it's an incredibly elaborate courtship that they go through. So when they enter the pond and they want to attract a female, they'll find the female within the pond, they'll swim up to her, they nudge her cloaca, which is just here. So there we go. So that's where their reproductive organs are. So at that point, they'll nudge that to say, hey, look, I'm here, I'm interested. He'll then swim in front of her, make sure that she's focused on him and staring at him. At that point, he'll do a whole bunch of sort of tail whips or sort of swishing movements with his back tail, where essentially he's just pumping pheromones at her face. Again, if I can liken this to a human scenario, it's almost like smelling guys that have just put links on. So there's a lot of hormones being chucked at the female newt. And at that point, if she's still interested, he then goes vertically within that water. And in that water, he'll do huge figures of 8 in front of her. So he'll be showing off all of that belly. So using his crest and his tail to move him up and down the water, and he'll display completely to her. And if at that point she decides, yeah, you're a good match, she'll swim up to him to basically initiate that they can breed. At that point, they'll follow off together. He'll lead her to a more secluded part of the pond, generally right at the bottom, near the sort of vegetation area. He'll sink right to the bottom, and at that point, she'll always keep contact with her nose to the base of his tail so that she knows he's there. He'll lay a single spermatophore onto the floor of the pond, and she'll then go over the top of it and take it up inside of her. And that's how their sort of mating occurs. Very different to, of course, what you spot in the frogs and toads, which is pretty much a free-for-all over. The males will grab hold of the females to mate with them and stay clung on until they've had the chance to mate with them. But it's an incredible display, and definitely I would encourage you, have local ponds that have newts, go out with a torch in about a month or so's time and do watch this display happening. It generally happens about an hour after sunset is when they begin, and it's a fantastic thing to be able to spot. To lead on from that, I suppose, from the males do all the work with this. They have to really show off that they've got good genes and they're very fit to be able to mate. The females stay a lot more muted in their coloration. So the females stay almost a very muddy brown coloration. They don't get this sort of very elaborate bellies. They don't get any sort of bright markings. Arguably, it's for a very important reason. Just like in things like peacocks, he needs to be seen to be able to mate, but she needs to not be seen to make sure that no predators catch her or anything like that. So really important for her to stay more muddy in colour. Also kind of handy to be aware of the males, particularly in how they look, because if you ever visit a pond and you're not sure when you're pulling the females out if it's a smooth newt or a Powermate newt, if you're spotting lots of the same kind of males around, then that'll give you a really good indication of what you've seen. So we'll talk a little bit about the Powermate newt. You will find Powermate newts again across many places in the UK. They have a slightly smaller range. You don't find them in as extensive the amount of ponds as you do the smooth newt, unless you head up into Scotland, and then this is what you will find in most ponds. The Powermate newt is a very sort of yellowy kind of belly. It's not quite as bright orange or elaborate as the smooth newt's belly. And you'll find here, so this is a really important thing to see. Again, it's the more intrusive way of checking. But if you was to flip that newt over and have a look at its chin, if it's pink or almost translucent in colour, then you know it's a Powermate newt that you're spotting. So it has none of that sort of cream colour coming up and no spots at all on that chin. So that's a really good thing to be able to spot. The males, this is handy actually if you're looking down into a pond, if you're lucky to have a very clear pond to look into. If you're finding almost like clubbed or webbed back feet, then you know that it's a Powermate newt that you've been able to spot, as they're very obvious and sort of dark sort of clubs that you'll spot as they're splayed out on the bottom of the pond. They also don't get any of that lovely crest. So they completely lack a crest. So this bottom photo here is a male Powermate newt, and you can see here he doesn't have a crest at all in his body, but you would have if you saw him top down here. You can kind of see it a little bit on this photo, but it's a tiny ridge you'll find down his back. But the key things for spotting him is this huge sort of like leaf-shaped tail, and it's got this tiny filament at the end. So it almost feels like their tail's lost something from the edge of it, but that's very true. It's just a tiny filament at the end, and then you know that it is a Powermate newt that you're spotting. Female Powermate newts, again, it's a little tough to identify them at times, just because similar to the female smooth newts, they want to stay hidden. They stay very brown and very sort of more understated in their coloration. But one of the ways you can tell is if you, again, a little intrusive, but if you was to flip them over and look on their back feet, if you find these little white nodules on their back feet, then you know that it's definitely a Powermate newt that you found. So the females have this to be able to look out for. I think we've got a belly shot, yeah. So this is the difference if you were to look at them both when looking at their sort of tummies. The Powermate newt, as you can see, a lot less coloration there, and that throat completely translucent and no spots whatsoever in that space. Next newt is the big newt, the dragon in all the ponds. This is the great crested newt. So this is a very old species of newt. So Triturus in general, in that whole group, that whole genus, are about 140 million years old. You find them across all of Europe, and just not in very large numbers. They're a fantastic newt. They're very large, so they're about double the size of the smooth or Powermate newts. So looking at sizing on those photos, if you was to look at your hand now, females quite happily run from about your fingertip down to the base of your hand. So they're pretty chunky newts, but there's a few key other things to look at when it comes to identification of them. So not only are they the largest, they've got a bright yellow belly. Yeah, very, very solid coloration there. It's very sort of almost looking like fire in their sort of coloration. The black spots, or as I would call them, splodges, is key to look at here. So it's not those lovely perfect circles that you spot on the smooth newt. They very much are sort of a mishmash of almost like paint splats across their tummies. So that's something quite important to be able to spot when you're seeing them swimming around, or even actually on land. If one happens to be on land that's gone past and you've spotted their belly, that's something quite important to have a look for. They have very rough or warty skin, so this middle photo is a great image for that. So you'll see they're very textured. So originally, the Great Crested Newt lucked out in the 90s. It got its new name, the Great Crested Newt. Before that, it was the warty newt. So we had the smooth newt and the warty newt. I do like how when people are charged with naming animals, they go very literally. So yeah, it very much was and still is a warty newt. The reason for those warts, exact same as the toad. It's got slight toxins in its skin that makes it kind of distasteful to most other animals. So generally, if you're spotting that warty skinned amphibian, it's not going to taste great. Whereas the smooth skinned amphibians will taste a bit better if you're a predator. The other thing is the sort of stippling. So you can see here all the way from his chin all the way down the side of his body. If you're seeing lots of that white stippling, then you know that it's a great crested newt that you're spotting. So that lovely stippling you'll spot, you can even spot it on this one over here. So that's a key thing to have a little look at for them. Just going to have a little look at the sexual dimorphism between them both. So they're a little bit different, just like the other newts that we're looking at. Great crested newts, just like the smooth newts, yeah, they get very dressed up at this time of year to make sure that they're strong enough to be able to dance and court the females. The key thing you're looking for, which is where his new name comes from, the great crest. He has a very tall, jagged crest. So it begins here at the base of his head, and it's very jagged, and it runs all the way down to basically his hips or his back legs. So that's really important, because remember, the smooth newts, their crest is wavy and it runs all the way down their body with no breaks. So if you're spotting that very high crest and then it stops, you know it's a great crested newt that you'll be able to have a look at. Also, probably the #1 ID feature that's useful when I survey for anything like great crested newts is that white stripe. When you go out in the middle of the night to a pond and you're shining a torch in there, this white stripe is probably the single most useful thing to spot, because it completely reflects that light straight back up to you. So you're knowing if you spotted that white flash, then you know you've got great crested newts within that pond, and it's very special. The other thing, actually this slide doesn't say, but you'll also spot on their toes. So great crested newts have lovely striped toes. So they're orange and sort of their general body colour, so orange and brown stripes. If you spot that at all, then you know it's a great crested newt as well that you've seen. I don't know what scenario you might only see a foot of a newt, but you never know. Maybe if there's lots of vegetation, then you know for sure that's what you're looking for. The female, as I mentioned, is slightly larger. So again, you're looking at about the same size as your hand. She has no crest. She very much is just a warty newt, but she lucked out with the name change. So she still keeps that very warty texture. She still has that white stippling down her belly, down her sort of sides, and she still has a very colourful belly. She has the striped toes, but she also doesn't have that white stripe. So she doesn't have this white stripe on her tail, but she gets a sort of yellow line just at the base of her tail. So she has this orange belly or yellowy belly, and that just runs all the way down the back of her tail. So another useful thing to be able to spot with great crested newts. So just like we did with the frogs and toads, we'll have a little look at their life cycle. So their eggs. So newts lay eggs one by one. They're very busy with this. So a female newt across all of the species will lay about 150 to 200 eggs in springtime, but of course it's a lot more effort because she's laying one by one in this sense, and also really important for why you need a very diverse range of vegetation within a pond. So lots of those plants around the edge, if they're quite easy for you to pinch and bend, then it's perfect for great crested newts or even the small newt species to be able to fold. Things like water mint are really useful for them. So what she does is she'll reverse on to basically where the leaf is, and then she'll lay a single egg and she'll almost secrete a very sort of sticky substance with it, and then she uses her back feet and she closes that leaf, so she folds it in half to hide those eggs. So she hides each and every egg from this this folding. It's quite a process. There's a YouTube video from a programme from BBC called Nature's New Wild, which actually showed in a canal in Manchester. They filmed underwater a female great crested newt going along every single leaf, laying single eggs. If you've got an incredibly large population, we're very lucky at our office in London, and we have quite a large great crested newt and smooth newt population there. You'll find every single leaf is folded. It's a bit baffling to explain to people when they come and none of our plants have grown much because they're all just folded in weird 90-degree turns. But yeah, it's a great thing to be able to spot. One of the big reasons that they fold like this, well, there's two main reasons. One is to hide from predators. So by folding it, of course, it's giving it that extra protection. And the second reason is it protects them from any UV light. This is particularly important for the great crested newts. You can see this white coloration. So they're very they're larger eggs, but they're bright white. It basically has no natural UV protection themselves. So if any sunlight did hit that directly, it's unlikely to become viable or be able to grow. Even more important, because of course, if they're laying on plants during springtime, as the plants grow, you may find the eggs themselves, when the folded leaves, will end up higher than the water level itself. So just an important thing to look out for. And if you've got a very keen eye, it's quite a good, easy thing to do when surveying for newts, is to walk around the perimeter of a pond and have a look for any folds. I'll have to be brutally honest in saying the small eggs, the small newts, so the Powermate and the smooth newt, so these eggs here, the small, it's near impossible to tell if it would be a smooth or a Powermate newt egg there. I mean, if you knew all of the history of the pond and you knew it was only Powermate newts that use that pond, then of course you can say, but without doing any form of sort of eDNA testing or anything like that on them, you wouldn't be able to tell by eye what exact newt that is that has laid that. But the great crested newts, double in size and a bright white egg, so can be useful for you. We go sort of a step further, so we look at their larvae, sort of, or their tadpole stage, shall we say, when they start to look like little axolotls almost. They sort of turn into quite long bodies. They get sort of a, so you'll see here they always get sort of a tail fin that goes across their tail here at the back. And they have these sort of very long gills that are very sort of, they're all fringed. And that's how they use them to sort of breathe within that period of time. The first thing to develop within their body, they get their back legs first. So that's something you'll start to spot. So actually these top two are kind of useful for that. You start to spot that here. And then over time, they'll reabsorb that tail. Well, they'll reabsorb sort of the tail fin, shall we say, to build out their body size. And then they'll leave the water itself. The key thing to show, again on this photo, is that our two small newt species are very hard to distinguish at this point, the smooth and the Powermate. And at this point, I mean, they can be as small as about 1 to 2 centimetres if you're pulling them out. Sometimes people mistake them for fish fry or anything like that within the pond when they're pond dipping. But if you looked in really, really close, you might find this disproportionately large eye on this fish. Is showing you actually it's a little newt larvae. But the key thing to see here, not only would the great crested newt sort of larvae be slightly larger, but they have these black spots. So if you're spotting black spots on the larvae along its tail fin, then you know it's a great crested newt that you've spotted in that area. So we just we'll finish up, got 2 more slides, and then you can all have a little break or ask me any questions that you wish. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of those non-native newts. As with the first point there, most of our non-native newts have appeared in the wild from the pet trade. as much as it's to their dismay, newts tend to be, and then they look phenomenal. They get those lovely crests, they get the lovely colorations. Lots of people want to keep them as pets. Quite often they can be childhood pets, so unlike a hamster, which might live for 3 years, newts, depending on the species, so something like a great crested newt happily lives to 15, can live to 22. Something smaller, so even the sort of small newt species, so smooth newt or anything like that, will quite happily live to about 9 years old. So it's quite a long commitment. People tend to get them and then think, I don't want to look after this newt for all of my life. If it existed in a pond in Paris, then by all means it can exist in my back garden pond, and quite a lot of the newts have appeared in the wild from this. So they are a little bit of a problem. They do crop up every so often. Just for the second point, as the story with most non-native animals in any group, regardless of it's just amphibians or reptiles or anything else, they tend to be in the big sort of public parks where you tend to find animals are there, and the big cities you tend to find them more in those kind of areas. So there's two main ones that you spot. So the Italian crested newt looks very similar to the great crested newt. The only difference with it is it's a bit sort of stumpier, so it's a lot shorter and it has no white stippling. It does cause a problem for our great crested newts though, as they can hybridize. So they quite happily will mate together, and then over time what you'll find is the genetic singularity and distinct species of either of them starts to disappear. And that's one of the key problems that they've had with great crested newts across sort of the eastern parts of Europe. As the Italian crested newt and the great crested newt's ranges overlap, there's a bit of a muddying of their genetic singularity there. So it's a species we're a bit worried about if you do spot out and about. Alpine newts, so this sort of iridescent blue newt that you can spot below, a very aesthetically pleasing newt, has a bright orange belly, no spots on that whatsoever. The females, they almost look marbled in appearance. They're again can be quite large newts. They're a growing concern in the UK. So alpine newts you find all across Europe, and there's another version of chytrid called chytrid B sow, and the sow leading to salamanders or newts. So the alpine newt is completely immune, has no issues whatsoever with chytrid B sow, but it is a vector for it. So it carries this disease on its skin, and as it moves from pond to pond, it spreads this disease further and further. Slight problem, well I say slight, it's even bigger than that. In the northern parts of the Netherlands and Germany, they've had a massive issue in the past sort of 5 or 6 years with chytrid B sow, in that they've actually lost 99.9% of their fire salamanders in the wild because of this one disease. We know that chytrid B sow, if it gets into UK waters, will definitely damage the populations of great crested newts and smooth newts, particularly great crested newts. We know it is a deadly fungal disease for them. So it's a bit of a worry. So it is something that I'll talk a bit about later to show you warning signs, but it is something if you ever see newts, or any of our species really, but any newts that look sick, so maybe they're lethargic or their skin's sort of peeling in weird places, please do get in touch with us or Garden Wildlife Health, as it's a concern. There's been no records of chytrid B sow in the UK in the wild yet, but we are aware from people that keep these as pets, there is chytrid B sow in some pet populations in the UK. So some people that keep them do have chytrid B sow. So fingers crossed it won't happen, but to be proactive, keep an eye out for anything that might look sick.
So in Warwickshire, we don't really tend to get many Powermate newts. So if you see a small newt, it's likely to be a smooth newt. So there tends to be less confusion in Warwickshire. I learned about newts and I got a newt license in Oxford, and was quite surprised when I came to Warwickshire to know that you don't actually get that many Powermates. So yeah, just an FYI really. We have actually had newts being seen crossing our roads already here in Warwickshire this year. And we're expecting obviously the toads and frogs to come soon. So normally we do have toad patrols and other, well, amphibian patrols on roads and in hotspots where we know that there are quite a lot, so that we can try and move them on and save some. At the moment that's not happening so much with COVID, but they did do some last month. These are generally run by the Warwickshire Amphibian and Reptile team, aptly named WART, so it's easy to remember. So well worth Googling them. They'll come up on a normal search. They are, you know, a small organisation, a bit like Warwickshire Bat Group or Mammal Group, so you can join them. They're also quite active on Facebook if you want to check them out there, and they regularly post updates about what's happening with our amphibians there. And actually in Warwickshire, we're quite good at promoting amphibian ladders. So it's something that we've been trialling for several years here. Lots of amphibians, when they're crossing roads, get caught in drains, essentially open gully pots. So a new sort of ladder has been designed that can be retrofitted into these to try and make sure that they don't fall in where they can't get out, and they enable them to escape. And there are some particular areas that we've installed them in Warwickshire. So it started off in Balsall Common, for anyone who knows that, sort of nearer Solihull way. And actually very recently, the last couple of months, they've been installed in, I think it's Wasperton Village, if anyone knows that as well. So you can get involved in sort of installing ladders and helping out with that as well through WART. So yeah, just a couple of things really. I think they also take records of amphibians, so they're obviously interested in when you're seeing them. And if not, you can always report your records to the Warwickshire Biological Record Centre, as with any other wildlife record. So yeah, just a few things that I thought of that might be useful in terms of Warwickshire. I think we did have one question in the chat.
Yep.
I think it was Julie asked, how have other non-natives such as terrapins affected native frogs and toads?
Yep. No, that's a great question. Yeah, terrapins are a bit of a nightmare. Yeah, they do affect our amphibians and also some of the reptile populations that you may find in places. They're just incredibly good at eating things. And some terrapins can be quite aggressive. I know that from when I've entered ponds. I've had red-eared sliders go for me in my waders, which I've not been there to bother them. Yeah, they do pretty much consume everything. That's where the big sort of problem is with them. The other sort of other issue with them is ethically as well. I know when people go to dump them in places like that, quite often the water itself isn't warm enough for them to be able to reproduce. So quite often it's just quite a long period of them just slowly having a metabolism problems, being able to digest food and being able to live. There's an ongoing problem. Luckily, it doesn't seem to happen as much as it did post Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever it was that increased their popularity. But yeah, they are a problem. You do spot them out still. Only caution with that is if you spot them, please, of course, get in touch with whoever the local landowner is to remove it, just because if you remove it, you cannot release a non-native into the wild. So don't necessarily take it in if you haven't got someone that will take it off you, because otherwise you'll kind of be stuck with a terrapin. I know a few sites I've worked on have given up trying to rehome them and have makeshift walled ponds. They shove the terrapins in because they're like, well, they don't have the heart to kill them. Hope that answers your question. Right, do you think everyone's here?
Yeah, I think so.
Right,
okay. Go for it.
Right, let me, I'll pop my screen back on. Just move that. Okay, so I believe there'll be polls appearing in the chat in a minute. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to make a mental note, or if you do want to scribble it down on a sheet of paper, by all means, do it that way. I'm not here to mark you or grade you in any of this. I just figured it's nice to have a stop because I'm chucking a lot of information at you all at once. So it's good for you just to see some fresh images and you make the decision on what you think they are. So our first slide, species number 1, top left. What do you think that is?
So I'll run a poll. I'll let you look at the picture just for a second first in case the poll covers the picture. Okay, so I'm going to launch the poll now. this is species number 1. Okay, most of you have voted, so I'm going to end the poll. Any last orders? Okay, I'll end the poll there.
Right. Okay. So I see it split the group on that one a little bit. So this one here is actually a male smooth newt. So a few things just to draw your attention to is he's got lovely circular spots as the key thing that we're looking for on him. And also we can just about see his crest, which begins here and it's wavy. And it's wavy all the way around down to the base of his tail. And remember, great crested newts, it would have a break here, so his crest would stop. So just to be cautious of, it always just takes practice seeing newts, particularly when we always find if it's got a crest, of course, people go to the one that's got the name crest in it, and the same with the bellies look very similar. So we'll do the poll then for newt number 2. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Whoops. Species number 2 in the top right.
Okay, I'll launch the poll now. Everyone have a good look. Okay, everyone's voted, so I'll end it there.
Nice. So it's pretty solid there. Most people knowing this is a male Powermate newt. So yeah, just as Debbie had said, not one you're necessarily going to spot in Warwickshire, but you may spot one else going to other ponds elsewhere. But yeah, he's got that little tail filament, and although it's tough to see on the side of him, he's got that clubbed back feet. Back foot rather. Okay, so species number 3. Who is that?
Okay, I'll launch the poll. Got more of a split going on here. Okay, everyone's voted.
Right, so yeah, a bit more of a split, so let me close that, not way. So yeah, this is actually, although very muddy and very textured, this is a common frog. So the key things we're looking for is, even though he's got muck all over him, he's got quite smooth and waxy looking skin, which first off tells us he's a frog. The second thing is, although it's really not that visible because of the lighting in this, he does have a slightly darker eye mask, but we can rule out the bullfrog just because he doesn't have that lovely stripe. So he doesn't have a lovely green stripe or a yellowy stripe on his back. So just the key thing to remember to just think about when we're spotting them out and about. But yeah, I always think the mud on that one throws a lot of people. So species number 4, who does that belong to?
Okay, had a look. I'm gonna launch the poll for number 4. Okay, everyone's voted. I'll end that there.
Nice. So yeah, it is common frog tadpoles. So that brown coloration that we're looking for with the gold speckles tells us it's a common frog. Good spot. All right, let's go to our next slide. Ooh, if it's going to let me transition. There we go. So number 5. Who's that?
Okay, I'll launch the poll. Oh, this one's going quickly. People are voting quick. Okay, and then the poll there.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it is the dragon. It's Great Crested Newt himself. So we can, I love this photo because where he's on land, he doesn't look particularly happy because his crest is completely flopped over, but you can just about see it there. He's very warty in his skin. He has that lovely white stippling that we're looking for. He has those striped little toes. And my favourite part of him when surveying, he has that white flash on his tail. Yeah, good going. So number 6, what species is that?
Okay. Almost everyone. Okay.
Nice. It is. It's a Great Crested Newt larvae. So it's got his lovely frilly gills at the front. He's got those big eyes, and the key thing that we're looking for with him, is the black spots all across the tail fin here. Quite rare to. You have to be very lucky to be able to spot them in this life stage within the pond and be able to dip them out. But yeah, good going. So what is in the bottom left? What species is that? Number 7.
Mixing it up now. Okay. One more vote left. Great.
So yeah, it is a Great Crested Newt egg. So of course it has been unfolded for us to get this photo. We can tell it's a Great Crested Newt egg because of the whiteness and also the size of it. Although I do think out of all the photos, this one is pretty tough. So he did well to get it just because there's no context of a smaller newt egg nearby. So yeah, good job on that one. And last but not least, what is the species in number 8?
Okay, and share those results.
Lovely. So that makes my heart very happy that you all know it's a toad that we're looking at, and that is the very handsome common toad. So you can see here it's got that lovely rough warty skin that's kind of uniform in its coloration of being quite brown. We can tell it's a toad, as well you all have, because it's got the sort of bumpy warty skin and also these large paratoid glands. He's also got that lovely James Bond golden eye at the front of his head. And then the key thing that shows us he's not a Natterjack toad, so even if you couldn't see his coloration, he doesn't have that little dorsal stripe. So if you saw that sort of yellowy or goldish coloured stripe down his back, you'd know he was a Natterjack. Good job. Good job. Right, I will continue, and we'll go on to the other sections. So just I'm going to touch a little bit upon the threats, as I imagine most of these will be things you're already familiar with. But just as we'll do a quick run through of some of them, of some of the many threats to amphibians in general. So this isn't just locked in as the UK. Many of these threats affect amphibians all over the world. but a big one is habitat loss and degradation. So quite a lot of ponds aren't either managed as they should be or are removed. So quite often there's been a big rise in people wanting patioed gardens now rather than having a more wild look with a pond or anything like that. So sometimes you'll find, yeah, we're just losing them or they're not of a good quality, the ponds that we do have. Habitat fragmentation is another big one. So as we expand, I kind of mentioned earlier on with the toads, as we expand and we start to build, sort of whether it be housing developments or different things and roads across the landscapes, we disrupt any migration routes that some of these animals go on. And of course, unlike birds and things that migrate, that can just fly around things, the amphibians are very tied to just only being able to walk or hop in certain directions. Then if they hit a hard barrier like a wall or something they cannot get through, they struggle with being able to migrate back to breeding spaces. Road mortality, I spoke a little bit about it, that mortality is being squashed on roads. It's a high number, but yeah, there's I've already touched upon it, but it's a big issue for many of our amphibians and also some of our reptiles that you may find that get close to roads. Other things is introduction of non-native. So just as the question came about things like terrapins or any of those other species, whether that be things like the Alpine Newt that could bring disease, or if it's a species like the Italian Crested Newt, which can interbreed with some of ours, or something as big as the Marsh Frog, which will just eat all the other newts and everything else that the other frogs and toads want to eat. That can be a problem within those spaces for us. Hand in hand with that is disease. As people move amphibians from one pond to another, you could be introducing diseases everywhere. Pollution. They're very much amphibians similar to the sort of canary in the mines concept of they're one of the first species that if a pond or a lake or even sometimes streams, if they become polluted with any form of heavy chemicals, you'll find they'll be one of the first things to either die off or leave. And that can be quite stark when it does happen. So something to be cautious of. And climate change. Climate change is actually a really important thing to write in with our amphibians. As an animal that sort of hibernates per se. I mean, it doesn't particularly hibernate. They go through a process called torpor, which does mean when it gets colder, they become less active and they kind of hibernate. So they completely slow down and they'll be static for the winter period. But they do get up again when it starts to get warmer. So when we have mild winters where you might have a day where it gets quite warm, you'll find they'll be coming out and they'll be burning quite a lot of fat off by doing this. So they'll eat tons during autumn to go into this sort of like torpor or hibernation. And then when it warms up, they come back out. But of course, there's not quite as much food available because the invertebrates wouldn't have come out in the middle of December or January. So they've come out a little early and then they go back and many studies have shown the more disruption to this sort of natural sort of seasonal changes or needs of our amphibians reduces their body condition. So years and years of that kind of constant disruption actually starts to make them struggle with breeding or managing to survive through the winters. So it is an ongoing worry. Also that ties in with that is disease. So some of those diseases are temperature dependent. So anything that involves funguses tends to like quite warm temperatures. So Chytrid BD, which affects our frogs and toads, although I did say that we've had it here from the African clawed toads, it luckily hasn't taken a hold enough to kill off all of our amphibians, just because it likes to thrive at 24 degrees Celsius. So for us, the lovely UK weather, we don't get consistently hot weather enough so that it can wipe out whole populations. You may get small areas if it spikes. It activates the sort of the growth of the fungus and a small population grow off, but not all of them. Whereas Chytrid B Sal, which is the one that affects those newts and the salamanders, that likes to thrive at 18 degrees Celsius, which is why it's pretty much up there on our hit list of it's a real worry because we do sit at those kind of temperatures. So as that kind of thing fluctuates, it's something for us to keep an eye on of any long-term change. Just to hone in on the habitat loss or degradation, it's just having a little look at the amount of ponds that have gone. So quite a lot of ponds in general either are completely sort of not managed, and ponds are the very first step of succession. I always like to think of it as a pond's dream is to become a woodland. It wants to keep growing, it wants to keep getting bigger, but they are a habitat we need to help and manage. So just as Debbie had mentioned, there are many sort of things you do across the season to maintain all of your habitats, but ponds are one of those that if you left them completely to it, it's very likely the grasses will start to move in and then it will start to develop into something much larger. So something just to be cautious of when it comes to our ponds. I won't dwell on this slide. I know it's never necessarily the most intriguing or fun slide to talk about licensing, but there's quite a lot of sort of legislation out there that does protect or in some way involve our amphibians, or actually many of our wildlife, to be honest. The main one that does protect them is the Wildlife and Countryside Act. That's mainly stopping people from being able to take them from the wild and selling them on, or trying to put them up for sale or doing anything like that. And generally not so much with the movement around. Of course, we are talking about all of our amphibians in the UK. The great crested newt has its own licensing. So with that, it's a European protected species. So it has stronger protection to it, like some bat species. So with them, it will be the case that if they're present in a pond or found in an area, that pond will have slightly higher protection. So it might be that you cannot remove that pond, or a much larger mitigation sort of process has to be put in if you want to develop anywhere near it. One quick caveat whilst I'm talking about that, that doesn't mean you can go and collect a great crested newt and then just put it in your back garden and your next door neighbour can't have an extension. It doesn't work like that at all. That they'll be seeing at how viable the habitat is for them. So they'll know if you've done that, if you've collected some and moved them. If you're found to be handling great crested newts or damaging them or in any way sort of threatening them or their habitats, there is large fines, and there can be custodial sentences for this. You can actually have a look online at a few cases where there's been pretty hefty fines of people filling in great crested newt ponds ahead of developments, or people sort of actively being identified killing them. So these fines range anywhere between sort of £1,000 all the way up to a few £100,000 if you're found to be damaging them or their habitats. But I think it's very special that we have them, and I think most people would be quite happy to say they have these ancient, very old amphibians living in their back garden in their ponds. But yeah, there's plenty more information about licensing, and if you want to learn more about that, or specifically about great crested newts, we've got a whole section on our website if you're interested in knowing a bit more about how this ties in with amphibians. So we're going to touch upon a bit of the surveying. So we'll just go through some of the various techniques that can be done. There's quite a few different techniques in general for amphibians. Generally, I mean, this whole thing here I've set up as if it was for newt surveying, and just to put in the caveat now, before I forget to say it, of course, this will depend on if you have protected species. So many of these, if there are great crested newts, for instance, in your ponds or around your ponds, you would need a license to be able to do most of these things. So do be aware, of course, what you've found in that area. And for any of you that were doing any public engagement or anything like that, or even in sort of your future career, don't ever be worried if you find great crested newts on a site where maybe you want to do engagement with children or any pond dipping. There are plenty of licenses out there to allow you to pond dip in areas for an educational purpose. So don't worry that if they're there, they're so pristine that you've lost access to the habitat. There's many ways sort of around that. The first sort of method that we'll touch upon is egg searching. Of course, for frogs, it's pretty obvious when you visit a pond if you can see any frog spawn that's been laid there on the pond surface itself. But in the context of looking at newts, this is kind of where these tables are based on. You're going to it can be quick and easy if they're about. So if you're very lucky, you turn up to a pond like the one at our office and everything is folded over, it's very easy for you to establish that you do have a population of newts there. Something to be aware of, that's pretty much just systematically going around the edge of the pond, checking vegetation in that sense. Also, if it's a very clear pond, if you're looking for toadspawn, again, looking around the edges where it's vegetated, looking down into the pond itself, seeing if you can see those strings within that space itself. Dip netting, It's just, again, sequentially going round a pond. We would tend to go round sort of a pond in 2 metre intervals, do sort of a figure of 8 dip to check what's within that space, whether or not you've caught any of the, maybe it's amphibians per se. I mean, most amphibians generally are good enough at swimming away. They don't always. On one site I took a group of kids out on, we were pond dipping, and an 8-year-old boy pulled up in one of the lovely big nets. He pulled up an adult marsh frog, which for some reason was quite happy to have this little 8-year-old somehow hook him up, and he just turned up, which the kid could barely hold the net anymore, but that doesn't normally happen. But that's something you can do. It's just add a bit of caution there. If you're doing a whole day of surveying, let's say on a pond, you're doing a big sort of bio-blitz, you're doing many different things, and you're looking for amphibians, the minute you start putting your nets into that pond, do be aware that you're disrupting the pond itself. So even if there were newts in there, you've dipped 10 times, you've actually not found them because they've all swum away, it's unlikely they'll come back because they'll be aware there's sort of there's a presence there, and they're not going to make themselves known to anything that might be a predator. Terrestrial refuge searching. So this is anything like going around, you could be checking mats, you could be checking under log piles, or under sort of any forms of like hibernacular you might have built. So that could be anything like capped sort of mounds of rubble, or different sort of logs and twigs and different levels like that, and just having a little look in those places to see if you can find any of our species in those particular areas. For things like newts, it's quite handy because newts in their first few years of life, so they'll probably spend most of their time within about 500 meters of the pond. So if you've got lovely sort of log piles around the edge of your pond, in general, they're probably a really good place to begin your refuge searching and having a little check. As I imagine you all would do, just have any caution if you're ever lifting logs up and putting them back down, that you don't want to, of course, crush anything underneath there, and it's natural human error. It's very unlikely we're going to be able to pick it up and put it back down in the exact same place. In that scenario, by all means, pick the animal up, place the log back down, put it to the side, or if you've got other sort of logs or twigs nearby, put it back in a slightly different place where it's slightly higher up so you don't crush anything underneath when you're doing your survey. The next set of sort of surveying techniques, we have torching. So we're just about getting to torching season. This is useful for the newts, particularly when looking for sort of their courtship displays. So you go in there in the sort of night time, and you'll be torching, again, very similar to the netting where I was sort of saying we go around in sort of 2 meter intervals to have a little look what's in that pond and record anything we're actually seeing. Of course, the big disadvantage there is if you have no access to be able to look into that pond, torching is not going to be any use to you. If it's heavily vegetated, you're going to be unable to be able to spot, or if it's very turbid or sort of brown or mucky looking, there's going to be no use you shining a torch into it. I know in some places, if there are ponds you regularly survey, some places manage them to have areas that have gaps so that you can torch each year around those spaces. Bottle trapping. So this is a series of, you're basically just creating traps, generally very technical and fancy, generally 2 litre bottles, where you're inverting it essentially as a funnel trap. So you're using sort of a bottle, if you used to look at something like a Coke bottle or a Fanta bottle, and you cut the top off and you looked at the shape of the funnel, you're inverting that into the trap itself, submerging it under the water with a little pocket of air within it, so that anything that swims along swims into the wide bit and gets trapped in there. So then you come back, normally really early in the morning, you set the traps very close to sort of midnight or whatever like that, and then you'll leave it a few hours, you come back and you're checking what you found within those spaces. Extreme caution with that if you've got other non-target species within the pond that maybe need more oxygen within that space, it's not always your best option. Also, you need to make sure you have a license if you're doing anything near where great crested newts might be, because you don't want the chance of you catching them, and then let's say your trap itself has floated into the middle of the pond where you can't get, and then there's problems for the animals that are caught within them. So just be aware when you're doing these things. I probably actually should have had here health and safety as well, also to be aware of here, because many of these are done in the evenings. So particularly if you're out on site, of course, make sure you've done all your risk assessments beforehand before you're going out there in the middle of the night with one torch to figure out where you're going to put your traps out. Pitfall trapping, we don't necessarily do this often. It's very rare at Frog Labs we ever do this. It was only in sort of previous times where we've helped with mitigation, and that just might be you're trying to collect quite a lot of the species and moving them on. There's a lot of risks with pitfall trapping in the sense that you may catch quite a lot of non-target species in those kind of traps. And also just be aware if you're near any urban area that might have roaming cats, just be cautious that if you're trapping them in a place where a predator could just come along and those animals can't escape. So just to be mindful of with that. I mean, there's plenty more information about sort of surveying techniques that you can access, and I hope that, of course, COVID permitting, you do get a chance to go out and do some of this, because there's nothing more exciting than going out with something like a torch and actually getting to see what you learn so much in theory about. So we're just going on to sort of the last bit of the sort of talk, so a little bit about amphibian disease and then a little bit about biosecurity in general. It has the caveat, which I had to write in because I always forget to tell people. The next slide is a little gnarly, so if you don't particularly want to see any of our sort of amphibian species with disease on their skin, it might not be the greatest slide for you, but just so you're aware. So this is a few instances of what you might find on some of our species. So the top left, this frog that we can see with all of his skin very sort of white and peeling off. This is a frog that's unfortunately contracted chytrid BD. So this is essentially it's a skin-eating fungus. It stops the amphibian from being able to have the oxygen exchange through their porous skin, because it basically clogs all of it up, so it starts to essentially suffocate the frogs or toads when they're within the pond. And it completely, as you can see there, it starts to waste away the amphibian itself. Now, this is a very extreme example of it. I really wish it was nice and easy symptoms for lots of these diseases. It's not. Chytrid may present and may kill off a population without getting to that stage on their actual bodies. But the key thing really for me to mention about that is if you spot them being lethargic or not doing any behaviours that you'd expect them to do. So let's say it's a nice sunny day and you found a frog in your garden, maybe sitting on the patio or something like that, and it's not moved away when you get there, and you've noticed it's not going to eat, it's not moving around, maybe it's not moving properly, or it's starting to look very thin. At that point, you may be seeing actually there's something wrong with this frog. If that ever happens and you spot any amphibian or even reptile, actually, which I suppose you'll learn about in another talk, but if you ever spot anything that you suspect might have disease, there's a sort of project called Garden Wildlife Health, which we partner on, which just want any instances of disease that's found in the UK. So you just report with them, take a few photos and show them what you've seen. On some occasions they want the carcass as well, but just be cautious that you should report it just to let us know where they're at. The photo below that, so of these newts here, lost my cursor. The bottom left anyway, that's chytrid B cell showing up on two newts. Again, it's a little hard to sometimes identify. Chytrid B cell affects the newts and salamanders slightly differently. If left to get to its worst stage, their B cell is flesh eating, so essentially it starts to break down the amphibian skin from the outside in. So you'll find there'll be huge lesions on the newt skin that will start to go missing. It will look very red and raw, and it will work its way all the way down through their body. So I can only imagine it's an incredibly painful thing to happen, but again, if you do spot that, please do report it. To the top middle, which I don't know where my cursor's gone, but in the top middle where you see the 4 photos of the frogs together, this can be instances of ranavirus, also known as red leg. So red leg, you'll find these sort of large blisters or just reddening essentially of the legs. Again, it's a viral infection. Report if you spot it. We've got some more extreme ones there. You can see the 2 on the right where they're starting to sort of lose parts of their limb from it. It is rare that they will completely heal from this. You may find they'll have missing limbs or anything like that from it, but it does appear every so often in the UK. Last summer we had a few instances reported of ranavirus where it appeared in a few populations, had a small die-off, and then it subsided, but again, just to be cautious of. On the far right, that little newt with the little bumps, you get quite a lot of sort of infections or parasitic sort of skin ailments on them. So if you're ever spotting anything like this, or you're finding lots of sort of bumps or what might look like warts or anything like that, it's a bit out of place on any of our animals. Again, take a snap, send it on in to us at Garden Wildlife Health to have a little look at. There's quite a few of those that can go out and affect populations. At the bottom right, Matt, what you're looking at, so the sort of blue bubbling across the skin, is Amphibian Herpes. So this is something that it will appear actually around this time of year. So as you start to see the amphibians mating within the water, this is when the herpes presents itself like this. It's contagious to the other amphibians within the pond, so just something to be aware of. Again, report it and they'll give you advice on whether or not they want you to remove that individual from a breeding pond if you've got many other healthy individuals in there. By no means is this all the diseases that do unfortunately affect our amphibians. I just think it's a good thing to alert people to, because people don't necessarily think about some of these animals having things that are having quite a big detrimental effect to them. So just be cautious when you're out and about what you're spotting. It leads into things or measures we should do. So I did mention that a lot of those photos there were more of the extreme end of their symptoms. It might be you've seen a frog who's, a little bit slow around the pond, so he doesn't look like there's anything wrong with him, but he may have chytrid. The last thing you want to do is go, well, let me pick that frog up, have a look at it, and then I'll get in my car, I'm going to go to the park with my dog, and then I've seen another frog, let me pick that frog up, and potentially you've spread that disease between populations. So just be aware of that. We tend to say only really handle amphibians if needed. Don't really need to pick them up often or move them around. If you do, or if you're out formally surveying for them or anything like that, nitrile gloves are a great thing to be able to use. And they've been shown between individuals to have quite a low rate of transmission of disease between them, but it's very easy then for you to remove them from one site, go to another site, put new pair of gloves on. Also take precautions with your equipment, because as much as we have our pond dipping nets and go from pond to pond and do anything else, just be aware, what you may be moving between the ponds. This would also come down to not just disease, but any invasive non-native plants, I imagine. No landowner would be particularly happy for you to release any plants into a pond that you don't want there. And again, that goes to the amphibians not being moved. I know, again, when we hit this time of year, you might find members of the public might ask you, if you're on site or anything, oh well, my next door neighbour's got frog spawn, or in the school want to have frog spawn in their pond, can I just take some there? Ideally, no. The only occasion we'd say yes, fine, move frog spawn is, let's say a frog, they don't always make the best choices. Let's say you've got a driveway, there's a little puddle, it's been a bit rainy, she hasn't gone 2 more meters to the pond and she's laid her spawn in that puddle in your drive. By all means, pick up that frog spawn and move it into the pond, but don't be moving frog spawn much between further distances. We would generally say no more than about 200 meters from where you found it to move it. The reason we give that number is during sort of springtime, we'd expect female frogs to potentially be accessing those ponds herself. So if she has a disease, she would be introducing it also to those ponds rather than you taking it further away and then putting it there, even with good intentions. So just to be aware of. Again, I'm not going to talk all through this because I'm sure you've probably heard plenty about cleaning equipment and all that, but just going with the general guidance of check, clean, dry of all of your equipment you use when you're going in and out of sites. So just make sure you're cleaning things off as you go in between sites. I always think this is quite important for people like everyone here, that when we're got the best intentions and we're out on loads of different sites, me particularly, I visit a lot of ponds each year. The last thing I want to do in my conservation angle is be the person transmitting any disease. yeah, it's not the best place to come to where I live though. Probably all my pots of Virkon with various boots in different stages of being cleaned. But yeah, be aware essentially with that. So just a tiny summary slide. There's plenty more for this, and Debbie will give you far more information about specifically local within your county. But yeah, Dragon Finder app or local biodiversity record centres. But the key thing there is just please do record what you're spotting. It's good for us to know how they're doing and what's going on. Yeah, get involved with local toads and roads. Again, Debbie had mentioned that COVID has been obviously, it's put a halt to many activities, but as things change, you never know, there may be opportunities for you to get involved. Like later on in the season, you may find juvenile toad dispersal. They might need a bit of help with that. You can donate to any of your local organisations, whether that be us or the trust, you know, that kind of thing. The big thing that we're pushing at the moment is our wildlife tunnel campaign. So we've got a petition at the moment, we're lobbying for all highways agencies and places like that to really think about when they're building more provision for animals that need passageway like tunnels, it should be given. So you can find information out on the website. Building ponds, of course, always building ponds. Small bucket ponds will even do the job. And yeah, biosecurity, just as we touched upon there. And the sort of final thing there for me to say on the whole talk is just tell everyone about them. Not everyone, when they think of UK wildlife, initially thinks frogs, toads and newts. But there's incredible things that's happening all over the UK. And yeah, everyone should know about them. But yeah, that's me. I will stop my share.
Thanks very much, Emily. That was super informative.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Oh, I've run to time as well. That doesn't happen often.
Makes you happy when you see the clock. Yeah, so much information. Like I'm sure people took a lot away from that. I know you've provided a couple of handouts that I can send out to volunteers afterwards, which have got ID features, but also information about habitat, things like building a pond. If you want to have a go at that. As soon as I moved into my house, that was one of the first things I did. My husband was quite keen on obviously sorting out the house, and I was like, no, we're going to sort out the garden. I'm putting in a pond straight away. And he did his duty. He helped me dig it out, and we've now had frogs and toads, which, considering everything around us is a bit of a concrete jungle and astroturf, is quite nice to have. And so even a tiny little pond can make a real difference and bring life almost instantaneously to your garden or small space or balcony or whatever it may be. So yeah, does anyone have any questions for Emily? Yeah, go for it, Anna.
Yes, first of all, like really interesting. Yeah, I really like frogs and toads, like when I see them, but it's really good to know, like, learn more about them. But my question is, I kind of associate frogs and toads particularly with like smaller ponds rather than lakes, and I just wondered, is there a sort of like maximum size of water kind of body that where it gets either too cold or there's not enough vegetation or anything like that kind of that it reaches? Is there like a top limit?
That's a great question. No, there isn't actually. Normally, frogs are very non-specific. Anything from a puddle to a lake they will use. They're quite easy to please in that sense. Toads actually prefer deeper water, so it's actually toads that tend to utilise things like angling lakes. So toads are the only of those amphibian species that's tolerant to live with fish because of that toxin. Fish are great eating things, but they won't eat toads because they taste so bad. So you do find them even in those kind of spaces. So they do quite like big bodies of water. It just tends to be, it's a little tougher, of course, for you to be able to spot them if they're right in the middle, in the deepest sections. As with sort of any wildlife pond, I mean, as long as the edges are well vegetated and quite diverse, most of the pond's life does occur in sort of the top 30% or so of the pond, so around the edges. Most of the deepest parts aren't really used. So if the amphibians are in there, they're probably going to be around the edges. But yeah, anything from small to big, you will spot. It's probably just easier to find them in the little ponds.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
On the photo you showed, the great crested newt larvae as part of the pole,
Yes.
it seemed to still have a bit of a filament, like a Paratoid newt. Do they still have that at the larvae stage?
Yeah, so just trying to think if I've got a better photo in here. So it does kind of look very arbitrary. I don't know, I'm probably going to be too tiny to even show you this. It will start to feel like that because it starts to fill out in a slightly different way. So this is what it will then get to. And then it will start to fill up. But yeah, it can look a bit close to a filament. I mean, if you were to see it in the wild, what you'd be expecting from a Powermate or a smooth larvae would probably be about a centimetre to a centimetre and a half is what you'd expect to see. Whereas a great crested newt larvae will get a lot larger than that. So about 2 centimetres or so. I mean, I think context, of course, helps a bit, being able to spot them in that. But yeah, they can be, I find the larval stages of them can be quite tough. And also not many people tend to spot them. When they're larvae, they all spend quite a lot of time right at the bottom of ponds.
Yeah.
And to be fair, great crested newts full stop spend most of their time at the bottom of the ponds. It's rare you get a chance to see them. But no, that's a great question about ID.
Thank you.
That's okay.
I think Elle had a question, maybe?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, you said that they sort of go into torpor during the winter. Where would you find like frogs or toads during that time?
Yep, so you'll find them, actually quite a varied place you'd find them. So it could be in adjacent woodlands, under log piles, or I sort of mentioned hibernacular before, so sort of just the capped kind of log piles or things with rubble. Anywhere where essentially the temperature would be slightly better than the frost line. So that's a bad way of explaining it. So if it's very, very cold out, it'll be somewhere slightly more sheltered. I always like to think of it as, if you think like a predator, if you find it hard to spot them, then they're probably doing quite a good job. Toads, most people tend to find them under sheds. So they'll find any kind of hole and they might dig down slightly to hide within spaces like that. I'm trying to think anything else that's sort of useful to say. Yeah, pretty much under any form of vegetation cover, really, you will find them.
When I was a kid, we had one in our conservatory.
That's probably
like
quite
in the
nice and
mud.
sheltered. Nothing
Yeah.
in there to eat them.
I always thought it was really weird, so I was wondering if they did that.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose in a conservatory, to be honest, I mean, they're quite driven by just consuming whatever they can. There probably would have been a slightly longer period of any pests they could eat in there. Actually, another place you can sometimes spot them is sometimes you'll find them overwintering in ponds. Different variations on that. So newts particularly, if they've started to develop slightly later from their larval stage in springtime and they haven't got quite strong enough to leave the pond, they'll stay as sort of in that larval stage all through winter. So you might find them still in the pond, which can be a nightmare for if you're trying to restore the pond over winter time and you dip in and there's a lot of baby newts and you're like, right, not this year then. But sometimes you will find them there, and there's something called winter kill, which you may have heard of, which is if there are adult frogs or toads overwintering at the bottom of ponds, if it completely ices over, there's not enough oxygen for them, so you might find large groups of them dead on the bottom of the water from that. Yeah, pretty much everywhere, to be honest. Yeah, you'll find them all over the place, just hopefully hidden across winter.
Thank you.
Okay.
You can, is it tennis balls and things you can put in the top of the water to try and stop it freezing over?
That's it, anything floating.
Yeah, something like that will float to help stop that, especially in the smaller ponds, which freeze over a bit easier. Linked to that, Sally's asked in the chat, what do newts actually eat?
So yeah, they eat quite a lot of things. So in the pond, anything sort of small enough, so lots of different aquatic invertebrates within that pond space. I always think they've got a great life cycle, actually all of our amphibians, particularly connected with dragonflies. When they're only their sort of egg stage, dragonfly larvae consume them. The minute they turn into little carnivores with their legs, the relationship changes and they then go after those fattened up dragonflies. When they come out of water, they spend time on land. Again, pretty much anything they can catch. You might find small sort of ants or things like that about. You find them eating worms. They'll eat slugs. There's some great videos if you want watching newts eat worms. They're not always the best at gauging size. I've seen many newts like this size try and eat a worm this size, which obviously is not going to work, but you can observe them for quite a long time giving it a good go, of trying to get it down, but it doesn't work. But yeah, they'll eat many different things within the pond. That even goes to things that eat them. There's quite a lot of things that you might spot them. Again, I don't want to send you for a whole evening on YouTube watching videos of amphibians, but you'll find many juvenile grass snakes which will eat lots of our newt species. You'll find sometimes the little ones struggle to eat great crested newts, and you can find the most epic battles of will between an adult great crested newt, which is about half the size of this juvenile grass snake, both of them arguing over it. But great things, many things.
Anyone else? I think Becca might have had a question.
Hi, thanks. I just got to warn you that my internet keeps dropping, so hopefully I can ask the question. I was just wondering, why are great crested newts protected, and are there any other amphibians that are protected? I know you said was it the common toad, which is going down in numbers quite a bit? Yeah.
The only one that, you're right, the only one that is truly sort of protected by its highest degree is the great crested newt. Natterjack toads also have a level of protection with them, but they're generally a lot more sort of closely guarded in the populations they have. Great crested newts, it's just because across all of Europe, which is their range, there's been quite a dramatic decrease in them. Some of it due to disease, but a lot due to habitats. A lot of ponds have gone all over the place. I mean, we're in a fairly, I don't want to say this, it's the kind of thing you would never want to be said, particularly with decisions made by governments, but the UK has got quite a stable population of great crested newts, but primarily because as an island we haven't had the problems of all the other newts and salamander species interbreeding. So our populations are fairly well intact, but as you go further afield, they're harder and harder to spot. They've just not done that great in general. Common toad wise, I would love it if it was proactive enough that we could step in now with increased legislation to help them, but at the moment they'd still be deemed common enough, which is a shame. I suppose time will tell with that. I mean, common toads have quite a long lifespan. They can live actually to about 30 to 35 years in the wild if they're very lucky. So maybe in many years to come we might see an even more dramatic decrease, but I don't want to be too sort of down on that, but hopefully something would shift, that we would step in before it got to the situation that they were struggling.
I think that it's up to a 40% decline in toads. Is that accurate, or a 40%?
So it's 68% overall of population in general, but it's about sort of 40% less that you'll be able to spot. But then the other side of that is kind of what both you and I have both mentioned over recording of them. I mean, my whole project at the moment is about making sure people know the differences between toads and frogs, in case that's one of the problems, that if things are being misrecorded, could we be in a better situation than what we think we're in? It's always the dream.
There's a misidentified frogs out there.
Yeah, hopefully that's what's happening.
Abby, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, why have we lost so many of our ponds? Is it that they're being built over, or is it agriculture? Why?
Yeah, agricultural ponds tend to sort of disappeared over time. Where traditionally most farm fields had a field pond, a sort of a runoff in the drainage ditches, that seemed to change quite a lot as we intensified agricultural sort of space. So they sort of went, and over time the ponds that were still there was so much sort of pesticide use that as that sort of filters down through the invertebrates that they're trying to kill off with the pesticides, to the amphibians consuming them, dying or leaving because the land itself is too chemical. That's been a big one. Again, just I don't know whether it's just a popularity thing, but ponds overall, people were just less inclined to be building them. I mean, actually, it's one thing, the lockdown last year, we saw a massive rise in people actually building ponds. So whether or not we're starting to make headway on that. Yeah, just unfortunately they don't seem the most popular, which I don't understand personally at all. But
Tom has asked in the chat, how prevalent is the chytrid fungus in the UK and what is being done to prevent its spread?
Yeah, so it's not major. So B-Sow is only in captive populations at the moment, so that one's not in the wild. Chytrid BD is about. So what tends to happen is when it gets warm enough, we have sort of, just as you'd mentioned actually about the WARP team, so we work with the amphibian and reptile groups across the UK, in that when they're out surveying or anything like that, if they spot any signs of disease, they get reported so that we're aware what exact areas have them. So with that kind of thing in mind, it might be the case of containing any infected individuals, but the big thing that's been the big push, which working with Natural England has been, is the check, clean, dry, making sure that we or anyone accessing ponds does appropriately try and manage any biosecurity issues of not spreading it further. Again, it's purely temperature, that maybe if we got incredibly warm, we might find it's even more in the population than what we know. But yeah, it's about in areas. I know there's a few instances where I'm based in London, we've got a few areas that have suspected chytrid, but unfortunately it takes until sort of summers until we see them. There was a few years back, there was quite a big swab effort. I don't know if in Warwickshire the trust was involved in it, but lots of the groups went out and swabbed amphibians. It's currently, actually, there's another one happening right now in Cornwall and Devon. All domestic garden ponds, people are getting in touch with them to go, can we just can we pop in and swab your amphibians to check their health? I think a lot of that, I wish it was never the case, but it's down to funding, and whether or not funding's available. We could definitely do more of it. But yeah.
That reminds me, actually, there is another survey method which we don't tend to cover that much, I think mostly because it costs more money. But you can survey, for instance, for great crested newts with eDNA. So you take a little sample of the water, so that'll tell you presence or absence. So you won't necessarily get an idea of populations. It can be tricky if you've got a very sedimenty pond or whatever, and there are caveats. But that is something that's becoming more used, particularly by consultancies, and just something to bear in mind that you might be interested in. We did it in Cockrobin Wood in Warwickshire Wildlife Trust a couple of years ago to get an idea of presence absence there. Sometimes it can be useful just to give you that idea of presence and absence, and then if you want to know more about the population, then you can go on to use some of the other methods to count them and see what kind of level you've got. So that's just something that just reminded me right then.
There's also the I don't know if you've seen it, some places in the UK they've trained dogs to sniff out great crested newts. It's very early for that, but quite a cool potential for the future.
Oh, they're using dogs in so many things now. It's quite exciting.
It is.
Anyone else? Elle?
I was just going to ask, you said before, I can't remember which one of the newts was like immune to chytrid, but they're a vector. Why are they immune, or how are they immune?
That is a great question that I cannot answer as to why. They've been exposed to it, as with because it's been found in all the ponds they've been in, and they've just had no ill effects of it whatsoever. Yeah, I'm not that sure why. They do also think the Powermate newt might fare better against chytrid BD, but they're not sure at the moment. For that, they think it's because of the water, that Powermates tend to be found in slightly different water conditions. It tends to be slightly more acidic where you find Powermates, and they just find that all the vectors that tend to carry chytrid B-Sow don't use those water bodies. But yeah, I'm not sure. It'd be an interesting thing. I think there's so much still to learn, I think, with this. I think that's also the exciting part, I suppose. There's plenty more that we do need to find out.